Hey folks, Fernando doing another video for the Modern Survivalist, and in this case replying to a question that I got in my Spanish channel actually regarding the efficiency of steel shot, 12 gauge steel shot, bird shot for home defense. How good is it or not, if it's recommended? Before I go on, remember that if you're interested in this type of content and this type of information, home defense, self-defense, firearms, survival preparedness, especially in urban and suburban environments and even beyond that, street survival skills, my latest book, which by the way is selling very well. Thank you all folks for your support. Same with my first book, the Modern Survival Manual, fortunately doing very well these holidays. Good for gifts and such. Also the French version, Manuel de Survie Urbain, also available for those French speakers, and my Spanish version too. So it's got 3 languages covered in this one. So it's a valid question because there's a chance that, especially in these times of ammo shortages, there's a chance that you may have some steel shot from hunting or whatever. Maybe your parent, grandparent hunts, or yourself, and you just happen to have a box of steel shot, and you're thinking, okay, maybe this is just fine for home defense. And you know, it's a complex answer because it's not an easy question. You have to take in several variables. So let's start with the basics. Anything that you shoot out of a 12 gauge, especially at typical home defense distances, anything that you shoot out of this thing, basically, it's very likely to be effective. Simply because of the size of the shell, the amount of shot that you have in there, and the power that you have here. It is all very much likely to be lethal, all very much likely to be effective within reason, but in general, anything you shoot out of a 12 gauge, even less than lethal ammunition, can be lethal at very close range. There's a famous incident. This is back in the day in Argentina a few years ago. A football player, a professional athlete, got into a fight after a match, and a police officer, completely uncalled for, and he was prosecuted, and I think he did some time for that. But this cop just got pissed at him and shot him with a less than lethal shotgun at contact range. Basically, this football player, soccer player, in the middle of a fight with some of the fans there. It's amazing how he went down immediately, like struck by a bolt of lightning. At that distance, all that plastic shot likely went into his torso, along with the wad and everything. Even some of the deflagration of the burning powder, it may have gone in there because it was very close distance. And he survived, but he spent many days in intensive care, and he barely made it. What I mean is that anything that you shoot out of this thing can in fact be lethal at, and the closer the range, the more likely it is to be lethal. And just keep that in mind. There's nothing that you can shoot out of this thing that, oh yeah, that's perfectly fine. Bird shot is for little birds. It's gonna be doing nothing. No, bird shot is for little birds at 20 yards away. Shoot a little bird with this at 5 yards, and you won't have much of a bird left. That's going to be vaporizing it because it's not intended for those ranges. The closer you get, the more effective anything will be out of a 12 gauge shotgun. So sometimes there's this exaggeration and going far to one side of the opinion, or going very far to the other. Having said that, it is true that this is a far cry away from being one of the best options that you can go for. A bird shot will penetrate very little compared to buckshot, let alone slugs. And the smaller the shot is, the less it's going to be penetrating. The FBI says 12 inches. It's not something written in stone, but it has its logic behind it. Because if there's an arm up, if you're talking about a bigger person, if someone is overweight, several layers of clothing, and this just doesn't penetrate enough as to give you much of an assurance of being effective. Very close range, pretty much anything that you shoot may well be effective, very likely. Don't don't go far on either side of the spectrum of yes, completely useless, or yes, it's a elephant gun. It's just not that way. You have to understand the complexity. Even within birdshot, you can go with something like B or BBs. These would be some of the bigger birdshot that you're shooting, and this is going to be very effective at those distances, at very close. Unless you live in a huge mansion, most home defense shooting distances are what, 5 yards away, maybe even 5 feet, 7 yards, 10 yards top. Unless you live in a huge mansion and you have 20 yards of corridors around your mansion, there's a good chance that it's going to be a lot closer than that, and that means that pretty much some of the smaller birdshot is likely to be effective. Having said that, there's a very well recorded incident in which a girl gets shot by a mass shooter in a campus, in a college, and the guy walks in. This is all caught in video. He walks in with a double barrel shotgun. He just points at her and shoots her at maybe 2 yards away, almost, very close distance, almost contact range. He shoots her and she just looks around and takes off running completely, like a deer, scared, spooked, runs away. Why is this? Well, several things. He was most likely shooting birdshot with that shotgun. Also, the girl was one of those big girls, and by big I mean both. She was physically big in terms of maybe like 6 feet tall, big bone, yeah, but besides that, she was overweight, she was fat, she was medically speaking an obese person. She had a lot of fat. Besides being big, she had a lot of fat in that body. So with your birdshot, which is likely to penetrate 4 or 5 inches, there's some people that will have maybe 4 or 5 inches of fat before you actually reach something that may cause some kind of incapacitation, right? I'm not exactly a thin guy, but there's very few places in which I can look at my torso and think, yeah, I can get away with getting a 12 gauge, making an inch, a half inch wide hole, 4 or 5 inches deep. It's going to be penetrating lungs, heart. I'm just not that kind of body type which I can just brush away a shot from this thing at that kind of distance, even if it's birdshot. But if you are talking about a much bigger person, a person that is obese, and that person may be wearing heavy clothing in winter, and keep in mind, maybe an arm goes up. When the FBI talks about 12 inches, they're taking in account all of this, the type of clothing, anything that gets in the way, defensive gestures with your hands, with your arms. So it has to penetrate that and penetrate your torso and get to a lung, to the heart and spine, something that actually stops you. With this, it's just less likely to happen. Now, here's where it gets even more complicated when you bring in when you bring in steel shot. Steel shot has less of a specific weight than lead. It's just lighter at the same volume. Now, it may seem like counterintuitive. People think, okay, steel is harder, so it's going to be penetrating more. No, because it has less weight for the same amount of volume, it will not keep energy as well and will lose velocity a lot faster than lead. Lead will penetrate more. There's a great video from Paul Harrell, makes some fantastic videos, and he does this comparison shooting at his famous meat target. And you can see quite clearly that steel just doesn't do as well as lead. So if we're shooting a less than ideal round for home defense, and besides that, we make it even worse by going with steel, that is just a very, very bad idea, not recommended at all. If this is the only thing you have, man, out of an automatic shotgun, there's a good chance that you're going to be putting down anything that gets into your house with maybe not 1, but 2 or 3 shots. By all means, it is still an impressive weapon, but it's not the best load for it. That's simply a fact, and we have to admit that as well. If you're going to be going with birdshot, my advice, go with the biggest birdshot available, with B or BBs. Some of these will penetrate quite a bit more than some of the finer ones. 5, 7, those are very fine. B or BBs, these are very, very big pellets for birdshot. And of course, actual buckshot would be ideal, although you are talking about something that's likely to over penetrate if you're talking about thin dry walls and interiors, and that's a concern. Maybe go with this in a small apartment where you're worried about that kind of problem. Okay, one more thing that hasn't been, I don't think Paul mentioned it in his great video regarding steel shot. Steel will bounce back at you in a scary way. The lead deforms when it hits a wall, concrete. Steel does not. It just bounces back at you. And if you ever fired a steel BB from an air gun, you know exactly what I mean. Imagine that a lot worse and 100 times over. You don't want to shoot steel shot indoors because of this. It may just bounce back at you, and you may end up losing your eye. You may end up getting injured, shot yourself with your own projectiles. This will not deform. Lead will flatten like a little disc when it hits something hard. Steel does not. Steel retains that shape a lot more, and it just bounces with a lot of violence. So in spite of not being as great in terms of ballistics, it will bounce back with a lot of energy right back at you. So you don't want to hit this, against an interior wall. It is a big concern, and I don't hear that being mentioned nearly enough when people consider this for home defense. Just not a good idea. Steel shot for home defense, not a good idea at all in terms of ballistics. Bouncing back, all of this, just go with lead. This just makes a lot more sense. Keep that for hunting, where you're actually required to use steel shot for hunting, depending on where you live. But that's its intended purpose, and it just really not great for home defense. Folks, I hope I answered this question and you have a little bit more of information. Just my piece of advice. I understand that these days ammunition is there are shortages, but try to avoid using this for home defense by all means possible. Folks, see you on our next video. Have an awesome day.